Hello and welcome to the Tall Monster Marathon Podcast with me, John Hill, the running podcast for the over 35s with Marathon Dreams. Episode 52, Rest and Recovery. Quick disclaimer before we start, it's very hot here in the UK, so I have my windows open and there is some building work going on, so if you do hear drilling or sawing, that's what that is. We are keeping it real. There are no fancy pants offices here or no recording studios here. We are keeping it real, baby. So what's going on with me at the moment? So as I record this, last weekend I just did another half marathon, the Birmingham Black Country Half Marathon, which is a good local run to me here in the UK, which is down the canal. A couple of interesting little changes that had to happen to it because out of the control of the organisers, by the way. So it's a fantastic run. So if you're in the area or you can get here in the UK, I highly recommend you give it a go. They had to change the start line 2 days before because they were closing part of the canal towpath, and then there was a fire next to the canal, I think, either the night before or the morning. So the fire brigade were pumping water from the canal, so there was a big hose pipe about halfway or just over halfway into the course, so you had to negotiate yourself around that. But it all went off without a hitch. I did my third fastest time ever, which I was happy with. Finished 8th in my age group, 40 to 49, I believe. And then I finished 22nd overall out of 1,270, which is pretty cool. And I have to keep reminding myself of that, even for especially for somebody who ate, drank, and smoked his way through his 20s. To get here is quite impressive. And the first thing I want to say on that is always remember just to celebrate your success and your progress. And it's okay and it's allowed to do that. You're not arrogant. You're not, as long as you don't go out and start trying to make other people feel bad or start to attach too much meaning to it, it's a totally worthwhile thing to do. Now, one thing I was noticing before this half marathon, and the reason why I have called this rest and recovery, look, this is an evolving process. Now, there's no definites here. What I like to do with these podcasts is I like to keep it real and keep it fresh. So if something's happened, I'll go, right, let's talk about that and see if it will help you along the way. So if you don't know, being overweight before, I can get quite neurotic with exercise in the sense of I feel like, I have to do it, otherwise I'm going to gain weight. So resting either before or after a particular event is quite difficult for me. And I've also noticed that that's quite difficult for a lot of people who are in that type A personality trope, basically. So very driven, which is fine, but actually with running terms, and it does tend to be more of a male thing, even though there are some females like this. That bravado can get you injured and it can hamper your performance, because if I wanted to race to the best of my ability last weekend, I had to focus on that particular event. So resting before the event or getting in prime shape before the event and recovering afterwards are very important. Now, what I noticed was on my Garmin that I use, it gives me a training readiness score. Now, those people who know me and listen to this podcast for a while know that I'm not too obsessed with tech, because I think sometimes we allow the tech to tell us how we feel and we should respond to how we feel. If that makes sense. But in this case, what I noticed was my training readiness on my Garmin, which takes into account things like sleep, training load, rest, all that, was 90, which is pretty good, out of 100, which is pretty good. After I did the event, my training readiness went down to 15. So that told me, right, you've put everything into that particular event. Well done you, have a rest. Now, I was tempted because being a marathon runner, quote unquote, it's only a half. I was tempted to then go and do a run on the Sunday. But I thought, well, no, because clearly this data is telling me that I need to rest and recover. And then on the Monday, I think it was still in the 40s or so it still wasn't there because I was tempted to go for a run on the Monday, which I might normally do. Now, I've asked myself the question, why would I want to go for a run? Is it to enhance my performance? And the answer to that question is no, because my performance was based around that half marathon. So when I teach people and coach people, I say to them, the event that you're doing should hold all of your attention, not a recovery run afterwards or not a 5 miles slow on a Monday after you've done an event. If you want to do those things, it's fine. But for me, for optimum performance, you have to manage your rest and recovery. So what I did was I said, right, I'm not going to run on Sunday. I'm not going to run on Monday. Now, I did walk. I walked, I think, 3 miles on Sunday and 3 miles on Monday, which made sure I was being physically active, not only from a mental health point of view, but also I like to move and I like my body to move. So, I keep myself sharp, both physically and mentally. And obviously burn a couple of calories here. There's not that many, but you know what I mean. So I always like to do that. Just I like to do something even on my rest days. But what that did was that meant that my training readiness then by the Thursday afterwards was then back up to 90 again. And then my resting heart rate, interestingly, on the Monday, dropped to the lowest it's ever been, which is 35. And it was hovering about between 36 and 39 for the rest of the week. And the only thing that knocked it up was, arguably poorer sleep, but it wasn't poor sleep, it was just poorer sleep. So basically on Monday my resting heart rate went down to 35, then it went 37, 36, 38, 39. So basically it's dropped down to its lowest it's been for a while, and 35 is the lowest it's ever been, on the back of doing that half marathon where, and get your pitchforks out, zone 2 people, my heart rate went up to 90% of maximum for an hour and 15 minutes of that run, which is pretty much most of it. Okay, so it brought to the fore this importance of looking at your metrics when it comes to rest and recovery. Now, I am not a zone person when I run. I don't pay any attention to that. It's very inaccurate, and people put too much emphasis on it even when they feel fine. Where the data I think matters is when you're tracking your rest and recovery, because I was then able to let my body rest after that achievement to then go again. So I was able to analyse it, so I was able to forgive myself both physically and mentally, and that's important, especially like if you've got that neurosis like I've got from perhaps coming from a place where you were unfit before and you think I've got to train all the time. You have to look after your rest and recovery, particularly as you're getting a little bit older. And I noticed a little bit on Strava, because I notice these things, I'm human, that a few people that have done events are straight back out on the Sunday afterwards running again, on the Monday they're running again, which is fine, that's their thing if they want to do that. But for me, I got a little bit of FOMO thinking, should I be doing that? But actually I thought, well, no, what's the important measure here? The important measure here is allowing yourself to recover. So resting heart rate is a good indication of your recovery. So if that's going up and up and up, you know that your recovery's out. Now, when I was ill after my marathon in March, and funny enough, a few people commented after I did a podcast and they said, yes, you did sound ill. I was like, thanks. My resting heart rate was 46, 47. So it told me that my body needed to rest. My training readiness was 0, and my stress levels, everything was telling me that you're not well here, which is good, because then it's telling me that this data is fairly accurate. So if you're the sort, I think a lot of runners, and I've said this before and I'll say this again, for me when I speak to people, and this is based on real world experience, it's based on speaking to people, I see a lot of runners who, in my opinion, they focus on the wrong metrics, they focus on the wrong things. And I think if you have a solid focus on your recovery as much as you do your performance, I think you're going to get better results, particularly things like sleep, your training load, and things like that. Because I've noticed that what we do, we tend to let certain words or certain prompts on our tech trigger us, like Garmin will give you a maintaining, or it will give you a, it will give you a deloading or whatever it's called, or detraining or whatever it's called. It will give you something that tells you that you're not doing that well. But actually, if we attach too much meaning to that, it can lead us to think we should be doing more. And often when we're training for events, part of the process of training for an event, particularly if you want to get faster, is learning to let your body rest and recover. Because what I also noticed was, and this is another indication of rest and recovery, my legs were quite sore, so my quads were quite sore. So normally when I run and run relatively quick, I do get quite sore quads, and what happened was my quads were quite sore up until the Wednesday after, which also is another indication that I'm perhaps not resting and recovering as well as I'd like to. Now, this is linked to not only your physical performance, but also your mental performance as well, because there is a lot of FOMO with running. There is a lot of, like I just did it on this podcast, I saw people who went running afterwards, and I saw that and thinking, well, should I have done that? And that's FOMO, but actually what that's doing, pretty much like the zone 2 stuff for a lot of people, is it's stopping you trusting yourself. And you're thinking that you should do something based on what somebody else is doing online, and that's not the game you want to play. The game you want to play is, am I in the best condition I possibly can be to achieve my goals currently? And I think with how visual things are now, with the apps, with social media, you've got to be very, very careful that you don't get injured, or you don't get hurt, or you don't get burnt out, because you're trying to prove a point to people. Like I see a lot of this, oh, that was an easy run, when you look at the pace and you think, was it really? Because I know people that run really fast. There's a few people on my Strava who, when they go out and do a tempo run, it's a tempo run, trust me, it's quick. And they don't really talk about easy paces and things like that. And it's interesting that is because a lot of times people they try and inflate themselves. And I do this, I've been there, oh, that was a slow run. Now, it's not to say that are trying to make other people feel bad necessarily. It's just to be careful that you're not trying to prove a point to yourself and trying to show off basically inadvertently, which actually could lead you to getting hurt, because you could keep saying, well, this pace, 7-minute miles, whatever, slow for me, so, or you could think it was slow for you, and actually that could lead you down the garden path because you're trying to impress people on Strava, and it could take you away from your rest and recovery, which means that you're not going to perform the best you can as part of an event. Listen, races, runs, events, all of these things are there for a reason, and the training plan is there for a reason, including the rest and recovery and the adaptation, and you need to do that in order to be successful. I've realised this as I've gotten older, because I went for a run today as I record this, even though it's quite hot here in the UK, and I felt okay. I didn't run quick for me, but I felt okay because I thought my body's ready to do this now, and I feel a lot better now because I'm refreshed. So now I've got a couple of weeks of just adaptation, keeping my base high before I then go into HYROX training in August for the end of October, and I've also got a half marathon in September as well, but I know that I can comfortably run a half marathon as long as I keep myself sharp, and I've got no real aspirations about doing a personal best. So the moral of the story here, everybody, if you do listen to these podcasts, is look after your rest and recovery and look at those key metrics. Look at your training load, look at your training readiness, look at your resting heart rate, look at your heart rate variability, look at these things that are going to tell you whether your body's resting well and recovering well, particularly if you're training for an event. Because what happens is, when you wake up the morning of an event, like when I woke up for my marathon in March, which was, I did have a clear goal in mind, I had trained to the best of my capabilities to achieve a second sub 3. When I looked at my watch on the morning of that marathon, it told me, you are ready, all your metrics are in line, which was good because I'd planned and trained to do that specifically. Okay, so whilst sometimes it's hard, and I've said it in the past, you can't rest and recover your way to 26.2 miles necessarily. It's strategic, and don't hurt yourself because of ego or bravado, or don't spoil an event because you think you should be doing something or not, and especially don't feel the compulsion after an event to go straight out straight away and do a recovery run. I've got my opinion on recovery runs. I think after an event, I think if you've got the energy the day after to go for a run, you perhaps should have put that into the event itself. That's just my opinion. So that's as much for me as everybody else. So look after your rest and recovery and watch those metrics. Watch resting heart rate variability, load, and training readiness. And if your training readiness, if you've got that metric available to you, goes right up before a race and comes right down again, for me, that tells you that you've followed your training plan properly and you've achieved what you wanted to do on the day, and now it's time to rest and recover. So yeah, that's a quick introduction to rest and recovery based on some practical experience that I've just been doing myself. So as I've just done it myself after another half marathon, I wanted to share it with you. Now, don't forget, as we're halfway through the year, and I'll do this again next week, is let's have a review of the year, because that for me again is another achievement which helps keep me on point and keep me nice and positive and remind me that I am making progress towards my goals. Of course, if you want any help or you want any support, just hop over to Instagram, follow me over there, best place at 12 months to marathon. With these podcasts, I do really, really appreciate if you follow it, subscribe to it, and if you pop a star rating on wherever you get your podcast from and a review, that really, really helps me. I appreciate that. And if you could share it on your social media platforms, again, that helps me. So don't forget, as always, most importantly, go and follow me over 12 months to marathon. And if you need any support over there, you can drop me a message and I'll be happy to help. Thanks, as always, for listening. I appreciate it. And I'll speak to you all again soon.